Yesterday, Joanna and Ursula gave a lovely lunch for Sid, and I want to thank you for that because it was wonderful. Everybody enjoyed it, and Sid lapped up all the praise, as you'd expect, absolutely lapped it up. And as you say, in 3 days' time, he will be elevated to that wonderful status of eternal octogenarian. Now, when you went off to New York in the early 60s to look at a lot of American pictures, oddly enough, I was doing exactly the same thing in London. I was working at the V&A, studying Chinese bits and pieces, arcane stuff, but every Sunday afternoon, with a friend of mine, an American friend, we'd go to the Tate Gallery, because I had this absolute thing about the New York School, about Franz Klein, Hans Hofmann, who designed your tie, Motherwell, Clifford Still, the great hero, Barnett Newman. And every Sunday afternoon, we would go to the Tate Gallery. We had two objectives in mind. First, it was the best pickup joint in town, and that proved to be true. And secondly, to look at all the great pictures that you actually went to America to see. And the other little incident I remember was in 1978. It was just before Joanna and I were deciding whether to come to do this job for 3 years at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And one day I was in the V&A, and I was in the Far Eastern section. We had a little ivory tower on the sort of east side of the building, overlooking the Brompton Oratory. And right the other side of the building, there was a little show. They collected modern art in those days. There was a little show of American watercolours, and I was looking at them. And I remember exactly, I was looking at Franz Klein, I was looking at a Helen Frankenthaler in this empty room in the V&A. And then the head of that department came around. He looked at me, he's called Dr. Michael Kaufman, he looked at me, he said, "Hello, Edmund, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm looking at these." He said, "But you're Asia, aren't you?" I mean, the very idea that you could look at something that was not in your territory was completely, totally and utterly weird. But these are the pictures, when I look at Sid's great pictures, and Jana's right, we had a wonderful day out at Glenorrey earlier this year, when it was April I think it was, or May, to do a day's filming with Sid. After all, he's a pretty seminal figure in the history of modern Australian art, coming back, and the field exhibition in 1968 in Melbourne. That was a landmark event, and Sid did the poster for that, apart from anything else. Then he loosened up a bit and started to flex his muscles, and look at these pictures. When you look at pictures like this, I'm reminded of that sort of debate that goes on about abstraction and figurative art. And I said, I don't actually understand the difference, because all art is an abstraction. Even if you're looking at a Geoffrey Smart or Richard Estes or something like that, you're looking at an interpretation. You're not looking at something that's factual. You're looking at an artistic imagination at work and creativity. And so I've never quite understood that debate, but particularly what appealed to me, I think when I was looking at these pictures, the American pictures, New York School, when Sid was there in New York looking at them, was that I found they spoke to me very directly. They spoke of a freedom. They spoke about the sort of instinct for emotion, for feeling, for sensibility, and for aspiration. And all those things, I think, are expressed and embodied in works like this. You cannot help but feel happy when you look at these pictures. And I think there's a consummate joy about them, which I think is an extraordinary thing. I think it was somewhere, there was things that his pictures are about colour, form and space. No, colour, light and space, which is true. Colour is pretty obvious, it's there in front of you. The light is pretty obvious. Look at it's as though there's light shining behind the canvases. The space, you might say, well, hang on, where's the space? Well, it's there. It's there because there's so much activity on these pictures. There's so much going on, there's so much energy. And of course, all these shapes, when you look at every picture, every time you see it, it will look different. There's these forms, these colours are constantly moving, and constantly moving forms and shapes create their own spaces. So there is that little sort of trinity of colour, light, and space are perfectly expressed in these pictures. But I think above all, a little incident happened earlier this week. On Monday afternoon, I had to go to an office at 39 Martin Place. Martin Place, I mean, that's a serious, that's a kind of sort of, it's a fairly pragmatic place, isn't it? Office buildings, they're fairly pragmatic. And I walk in the door of 39 Martin Place, I can recommend it. Go in there, on the right-hand wall of this sort of, the public foyer is a great Sid Ball painting. And I could feel people walking in and out of that building and say, that makes me feel better. These pictures make you feel better. And I think there's no greater compliment you can pay to an artist that his pictures are not only immortal, but they have touched the human soul in that way. So let's launch the show, launch the book, and pay all compliments to Sid, the nearly octogenarian. Thanks, everybody.